I've been pretty upfront in the fact that Roseanne is one of my favorite shows of all time. While it is a sitcom, and while it does have a bunch of the sitcom tropes that people like to make fun of, it is a show that has very good characters, a decent and very interesting storyline, and relatable humor. And even though the 9th season, which was at the time thought going to be the final season, it rarely strayed away from being anything but an overall excellent show. My love for Roseanne is so well known at this point that my first piece of fan mail, which I made a video about on my other channel, was essentially a fan of my show giving me a complete series of this show on DVD, and to that person, I thank you very much. I've been enjoying those DVDs immensely. When ABC announced that they were reviving the show, I was a little skeptical. I wasn't sure how they were going to do it, especially after the events of the much-hated Season 9, and I was also a little concerned about whether or not Roseanne would still be relevant. After all, the reason the show went the way it went in the final season was because Roseanne didn't seem to be able to relate to her audience anymore. And I wondered if it would be more sad than anything to be returning to the Connors and watching them basically still struggling with the exact same thing they were struggling with 20 years prior. My concerns were squashed within the first episode though, and after the initial 11, I believe, episodes for season 10 were completed, I was more than happy with the series. I know there are a lot of people who took issue with the fact that Roseanne was now a fervent Trump supporter, but I didn't mind this change as much as some people. It was just realistic. There obviously are people who voted for Trump, and considering where the Connors lived, it would make sense that most of them would be Trump supporters. And I thought it was just a nice little point of view that we rarely saw on TV. With all due respect, even though I'm not a huge Trump fan, it is annoying that every single character on TV hates Trump, so it was kind of a breath of fresh air that someone actually liked him. But beyond that, the heart of the Roseanne characters were always there. Roseanne was still abrasive but lovable. The kids were still trying to figure things out, in some cases even more so. And Dan Connor is, well, he's Dan Connor. He's considered one of the greatest TV dads of all time for a reason. And it was incredibly frustrating to see the show get canceled because of some stupid tweets. Now, after the show got canceled, I went on YouTube and I made a video expressing my disappointment, not necessarily defending her, but also wondering whether or not this was not an overreaction and where was it going to end. And now with the firing of James Gunn, I think we're asking that question more than ever. But the show was canceled because of the tweets, and I think we can all agree that whether or not a show gets canceled because of low ratings, or because of offensive tweets, or stars' behaviors that forces the studio, in one way or another, to cancel the show, it's a very, very bad feeling to have a show that you enjoyed watching not coming back. I've experienced this before, but in this case, it just felt a little bit more painful. And yet ABC wasn't quite ready to give up on everything because they have announced The Connors, a sequel/spin-off of sorts, in which basically it's still the same Roseanne show. It has the same actors, it has the same writers, it is everything that was last season except Roseanne herself. Like when Roseanne got revived in the first place, I took this news and I was more than a little skeptical. While it is true the family dynamics is part of what makes the show so great, there is no denying that Roseanne Barr is the heart and soul of the show. She is the centerpiece of it. And as much as we hate Bill Cosby now, if you were to take Bill Cosby out of The Cosby Show, I think we can all agree that would result in a very, very different show. Sometimes lead actors, regardless how terrible they are in real life, do have an immense talent, and it shows during the show. But at the same time, The Connors was also eagerly anticipated because I was wondering how they would deal with Roseanne. Having the matriarch of the family, who is so important to everyone's lives, not be there anymore is actually a very good launching point for a series that I think only the Roseanne show really could have tackled in a very mature and sophisticated way while still having the humor there. And so I was cautiously optimistic that the show would be good. Now granted, I've only seen one episode, and it's hard to base an entire show off of one episode because this one episode is dealing with the loss of Roseanne. And in my opinion, it was done excellently. Based on this one episode, I would say that I would think the Connors could potentially be okay in the long run. The chemistry is still there. The actors are still likable. The scripts are still smart. And while outing the Connor's grandson, or I should say Roseanne and Dan's grandson, as being gay, is probably tackling a bit too much in the first episode. I also sort of understand why they did it that way, because it shows Dan Connor essentially not sure how to handle a situation like this, whereas Roseanne would have probably been much more adept at handling the revelation that her grandson is gay and probably would have known what to say, whereas Dan is a little lost in that situation. That doesn't make Dan a bad guy, it just shows that he's human, and it shows just how much Dan and Roseanne worked as a team. And you can see that John Goodman is about 20 pounds lighter than he was in the last season, and I wonder if this is because the real life John Goodman misses Roseanne just as much as Dan Connor misses Roseanne Connor. And when I was watching the episode, when all the characters were talking about how much they missed Roseanne and how much they weren't sure if they could do this, it kind of felt like the cast were also admitting that as well. Yes, Roseanne Barr said some pretty bad things on Twitter and, from what I understand, could genuinely be a pain in the butt to work with. But they have worked for her for so many years, and they did come back to do the revival series, and I think there is a sense that yes, they do miss her, and they aren't entirely sure how they're going to do this show without her, but they are going to give it a try and do the best they can. And therefore, I'm going to give the show a more than 1 week chance. I think for the first episode, they did very well, and it's very hard to tell how they're going to do from this point on. While the first episode handled Roseanne's death masterfully, the followings are going to have to literally work on its own. Roseanne won't be there to be the center of the universe. The family is going to have to lift each other up. And while I am still worried about what that's going to look like, I have to admit, I'm kind of looking forward to what that looks like. I'm looking forward to seeing how the family lives together, and I have to also admit the final shot of the first episode of the Connors did leave me a little teary-eyed. I'm not going to go so far as to call the Connors good without Roseanne. A lot of early reviews have stated that, and you know what? I'm going to need the whole season. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. I know we all want to look at the first episode and say, hey, they did it, and just call it a day, but the bottom line is we can't. The first episode has a lot to work with and is dealing with something very emotional that we can all relate to. Whether or not the cast will be able to elevate the show without the center of the universe that was Roseanne this entire time, we're just going to have to see. Ultimately, though, I think it's a very promising start. But what do you all think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Did you watch the episode of The Connors? What do you think is going to be the future of the show? I would love to know. So comment below, like, favorite, share, subscribe. If you enjoy these videos, consider becoming a Patreon member. It's totally optional, of course, but even as little as $1 a month goes a long way to helping the channel run smoothly. And as always, flame responsibly. Have a good one.